Hello, welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. 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 Any place that has kids, dogs, and booze outside, I'm like, count me in, right?
That's right.
This is, I've never been here before. I was at Brooklyn Crab.
Yes.
And
yes.
I thought, send my mail here. Why would everyone ever leave this place? It's so incredible.
Yeah.
We are gathered here today. It's very biblical. We are gathered here today. George and I are
Sunday.
getting married, so I think that's good. We are gathered here today to introduce you to some of the development and the stories about Grounded, which is opening the Met season on September 23rd. And I'm incredibly anxious about it and very happy to be here because we're not there yet. And we just wanted to talk for a few minutes about how this whole thing started and what it takes or what it took us to write this. And it all started with this man who's become a very good friend, George Brant. And you're going to tell us how it started.
Sure. So this began as a play. In 2011, I wrote the first draft. And back then, drones were more of a, they were a top secret program, but kind of an open secret. People knew they were being operated. They just didn't know much about how they were being operated. And I was curious about that latter part and started doing research, what I could at the time, what was available to me. And I ended up getting very interested in the pilots who flew these planes. I didn't know, my mind was blown, kind of still is, by, I assumed that the drones were flown from in-country, where they were being operated, but actually discovered that they were, a majority of them were flown from a base in Las Vegas, outside of Las Vegas, all over the world. That alone was kind of mind-blowing, that was possible. There's a 1-second delay, I think, between moving the controls. And then the other thing that really interested me was that the unlike any other way of fighting war, because they're operating from this base in Vegas, they actually go home at night. The pilots, they're not serving overseas away from their families. That in fact they do a 12-hour shift and then go home and then maybe go to a soccer game. And so that kind of dichotomy of how these pilots were spending their days and what challenges that might be mentally were very interesting to me. And then discovered that, in fact, that the rates of PTSD they started finding out were at the same rate as fighter pilots. And that, again, was very interesting to me. I think the one thing we were told when the drones program began was that they were that they didn't put any pilots at risk, and finding this out, it was like, well, this actually is putting people at risk mentally. So all those things were really interesting to me, and I dove in as much as I could, and still are learning things as the programs become more clear and information's more readily available. We're finding more and more about how they operate. I remember originally the only place I could find a picture of the trailer from which they operate these drones was in this weird children's book that I checked out of the Cleveland Library that was kind of like telling young boys how cool drones were. But I was like, why was this approved? So anyway, I don't know, facts. So yes, that's where we began with this. And then the play started out at the Edinburgh Festival. Strangely enough, for a very American play, it started out with a British actress and director in a lovely, lovely production, a wonderful production, and then kind of spread from there. And has been all over the world, and then along came Paul Cremo, who's in the front row, who attended a performance of the play here in New York by Page 73 with Hannah Cabell in the role, and wrote me the next day and was like, I think I hear an aria. Would you be interested in exploring this in opera form? And I said yes, and then we kind of went from there.
So Paul Cremo, who is the dramaturg at the Met and also a really dear and old friend, but the head of New Works and writing an opera, I'm going to see, I saw the play in 2014.
Yes.
And it's now 2036. So
yes.
It's taken a really, they take a really long time. And the interesting thing for Paul, I don't know, does anybody here regularly go to the opera? Okay, you're much.
Fantastic.
That is very advanced. I mean, I found music. I studied piano starting at 3, but I did not go to a musical until I was 18 or 19, and I didn't go to an opera until I was in my late 20s. So for me, this form is still very new, and I feel very new to it. When Paul brought me to see this play, it's a one-woman play where she sets everything herself. She is the show. So I knew when he asked me, there was a commission by the Met, I thought, who are we going to get for this piece? This piece is about, when we say ask, don't tell, in a lot of the armed forces, there's a do, don't ask. And so there is this idea that there are people who are in charge and there are people who push the buttons. And those are very different positions because the people who push these buttons suffer. They're suffering right now as we sit here. They're in these trailers and it's invisible and they're what they call moral injuries. They're suffering. So this is really the story of one woman. Her first aria that she sings that Emily is going to do is an aria about the joy of being in the sky. And I realized that it was one of the first times I'd ever written a song or an aria for a woman that wasn't about romantic love. It was about exploration, and that for me is what music is like. It's an opera that's written for one woman and about 60 people, 60 men, which is how I've always felt in music. And so it's been really wonderful to just explore what it's like to be the only one who goes into the treble clef. And it's not like that for me now, but it was very much that growing up. And so we're going to throw up some images. Emily D'Angelo, I wrote this part absolutely on her, for her, went to her vocal lessons and got to know her, and she's become really a part of my heart. This is her, I'm going to get up so you can see. This is in the first scene where you see, this is where the aria you're going to hear where she sings. It's called Blue. This is the incredible Met chorus. There's something so beautiful about a chorus and agreement in the military. Beautiful things happen when we agree, when people laugh at the same time, that's agreement, when they cry at the same time, but when they do something destructive at the same time, that's also agreement. It goes either way. This is when they are bombing, they're in Iraq. So this is a whole section, and you can see these are LED screens. Mimi Lien did the incredible set. Michael Mayer directed it. Kevin Adams is our lighting designer. David Newman, choreographer. And these are all, that's Emily and all of the men in the chorus. This is Emily when she meets a rancher in a bar in Wyoming, and they fall in like at first. They have one night together, and she goes back and she finds out that she's pregnant, and that's the first meaning of being grounded. Being grounded has a lot of, I always think of coffee, but that's just me. But she's grounded by physically, she's grounded spiritually, and then she's grounded morally at the end. This is our beautiful Lucy, who plays their daughter. This is the daughter at 5 years old. You see the family. When she's 5, Emily decides that she needs to go back because the tides have turned and she needs to join again. So Lucy and this is the drone. That is the picture of a drone that grows, the commander who's explaining to her what flying a drone is going to be like. While she's learning about that. This part by Kyle Miller is going to be the censor. I don't know if you could see him. A lot of them were teenagers, and the Air Force found them by quadcopter, by gaming. He's 19 years old, and he's a teen who is helping her locate just jump in here, George, because you know far more than I do.
Yeah, so Emily here is just a brief explanation of how this operates. She's the pilot of the plane, and I don't know if they were trying to change this, but I don't know if they have yet. But originally when this program started, the pilots had to be former fighter pilots. So she's military all the way. And then Kyle here is our censor who controls the cameras. These guys and gals didn't have to be in the military beforehand. So they were actually, yeah, as you said, like good gamers that they brought in and found at gaming tournaments. So young people, and part of the rub for our hero here is that she's sacrificed all this to get to where she is, and now she's kind of ended up at the same place as some guy who just decided with a shrug to go ahead and join the military.
So eventually what happens is, if you can imagine these speakers, that they're cameras. I don't know how you feel, but I know that I've sensed that there are cameras everywhere. We're being surveyed. The surveillance is very deep, and it's becoming, a mentor of mine said, the last thing to go is going to be our privacy. And you can't really escape anywhere. You can't. So this is what starts to happen, is her moral universes start to collide. So she is wherever she goes, into a mall, she imagines that someone is watching her, and someone is watching her. And that's how I used to feel at orchestra rehearsals, and I think, is my kid alive? Is my kid okay in school? And then I would be with my kid, and I'd be like, is the orchestra okay? You just get pulled, right, when you're caring for people. This is their place in Las Vegas, where they moved from Wyoming into the bedroom. And I think there are a couple more images, and then we'll bring Emily. So this was a concept that George and I came in with. So when she starts to disassociate, there's another woman another singer, who comes up in a way out of her psyche to help her have a place to keep this trauma of what she's seen and what she's being asked to do. This is the end, when she ends up crashing. Instead of killing an innocent girl, she ends up crashing this very expensive $28 million plane. And that is Emily, who we're going to bring on to sing the very first aria called Blue. She's going to join us, and I'm going to go to the side. Here I go.
Where do we hide?
I'm going to the side.
Create
Oh, that's so much less boring than hearing us speak. Good God. So this is a little section where I'm supposed to talk about the music, but I fear that's going to be really boring. So I'm wondering if we can do some questions, a couple of questions. If not, then I'll play something, but ugh. Anybody? Thank you. And so thank you for taking pity on me. What a great question, and thank you for doing that. So the question was, I do come from the world, George and I both come from theater, and still we're allowed into the Met, which is incredible. Really, nothing on that? Okay.
I laughed.
Tough crowd, man. Pioneer Works, come on! So this is my fourth opera, and I was raised by an incredible, raised, really musically raised by a man named Richard Benda. I studied when I was 3 years old, and one of the things that he taught me, like we did TV themes. If you want me to play Born Free Man, I can play that like right now. He said, at your peril, judge music. At your peril, judge music. And it always stayed with me. So I played TV themes. I played everything in the circle of fifths. We did improvisation. We did, popular music, classical music. We did Kavalevsky. I thought Bela Bartok was a woman. So the thing that I learned about that was to accept and be curious about all music. And going from Broadway and the musical form, one of the main differences for me is we have this thing called the preview. And I don't know if everybody knows about this. You might, because this is Brooklyn and people are much smarter than where I'm from. You have 3 or 4 weeks of previews, and it means that your audience is your final scene partner, which I learned from the masters. And George, we've been part of, we call it the kick the chair. Like, it's really hard to be young and listening to people. And when you hear this, you know that a part is boring. The other way to think of it is coughing, which Alan J. Lerner has a hilarious part in his autobiography where he said suddenly everybody has TB. And there is something about people getting born that it goes to their lungs, and I don't know why. And you sense that you lose them. And part of it is we have to get our work up to speed. But part of it is we need to know what you are listening for. If you're going forward, if you're going backward. Now in opera, there is no such thing called the preview. There is the thing called you open your show and the critics and your parents come at the same time. And it is really hard. So what George and I did was we had an out of town and the Met, the co-pro with WNO, and we found out a lot of things. And then we went back and did, what would you call it, page 1 rewrite?
Sure, page 1, sure.
Yeah,
even just listening to that now, which we've changed the least, even that there's a few pronouns mixed up, yes, for this version. But yeah, it's definitely page 1. Yeah.
And we wanted to, music is forward in opera, but I just decided to stop worrying about it and to write what I heard. And with my partner, George, it's a marriage of sorts. What did we hear? What did we think? And to go from there. So the thing about opera, which I really love, is you can hear from Emily when she makes those sounds, that's not coming from using this. That's coming from her essence of who she is. And sounds being made, like, this piano is basically the same thing. The piano is a percussion instrument, and you need a pedal to hold it down, otherwise it decays. There's this thing laying down inside it called a harp. The piano is the only instrument that is really greater in terms of its, oh my God, the word I'm thinking of is tiramisu, but that's not the word. What is the word for, who just said that? Thank you.
Yes.
Can you believe I said tiramisu? Anyway, food truck.
Well, food truck's out there.
It is the greatest body inside, but underneath you see this. This was my mic that I was supposed to be using. This. That exact cue is you can hear it. So I'm holding down the sustain pedal, and I'm playing the harp like a zither. And when you hold it down, that is one of the cues for when they finally bomb Iraq. The pianist, who's Caitlin, who plays in the orchestra, she leans down, and for me, the beauty of that, and one of the tenets that we decided in the score is, what can a piano do that you don't normally hear it doing? Like, if you bow a cymbal, I don't know if you, like, there's a bow, one of those sustained cymbals or vibes, crazy things happen. You hear these overtones, and I was very interested in that. I was really interested if you have a tam-tam, which is like a giant gong, and you scrape it with a Super Bowl, it sounds like a person screaming. And so I got very interested in that, in this idea of what else you were doing, but also what the sky might sound like. Up here. One of the things that you can hear is playing, if I play this chord, what are the words that come to mind? Just shout them out. Triumph. Parade. Yes, I like it. Majestic. Right. There's a reason for that. So listen again. What are the words? Just shout them out. Pompous. Yes. There's a reason for that. How about this? What are the words? Sad, but why? Change. It's minor. But the thing about music, and the thing I love about pioneer works, is music to me is where science meets faith. Because how do I hear something? George and I talk about it, but what is music? I have no idea. I do think it's a form of, in this case, protest, policy, politics, and faith. And the science of that, which I'll just do really quickly, because I think it's important in a place that is rife with science. There's an overtone series. And it goes all the way up. And all the way up here, it's minor. So when you hear that minor, the reason it feels sad is because we are tuned to know that that feels like it's somewhere else. Every single child born, unless there are extreme complications, sings na 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 na, because that's the overtone series. And when you hear something minor, so we've been really playing with this idea here that you hear it in the accompaniment. So when you put them side by side, it confuses your ear. You're not quite sure. So that's just one of the things that I hope you will come see this opera, because I think that it's important storytelling. I think it's based on a pivotal and important play about what happens when people who I would call the invisible protagonist come down stage and get to tell their stories of what it's like to be asked to do something and have no agency. So with that, we would love to welcome Paul Cremo up, and we're going to talk a little bit about the development, and then we're going to do some more Q&A. Choreography.
Hi, everybody. So, as you were saying, this started as a one-woman show, and Jeanine came and saw the play and saw an opera in it. Going from that stage forward, what was the first thing that you thought or learned in discussion with Jeanine had to be done to blow up this one-woman show, to expand it into a multi-character chorus using opera?
A very good question. Yeah, we had a series of lunches, and then they progressed into dinners, and talking about that. And I'd say a couple of the moments, there was one time where we visited the Met and walked around when the stage was bare, and it just kind of, just being able to physically be there and imagine how to fill that space was a daunting and an exciting proposition. and then there was another moment, I think these were separate times, when I know you really wanted to hear at least a section of the play from the Met stage to get an idea, again, of this protagonist and of the language. And we recruited Kelly McAndrew, who would play the part in Pittsburgh. And she did about 20 minutes on the La Boheme set, I think, which was interesting in itself. Yeah, it was really, I mean, I think that was a kick in the pants and encouragement once. I mean, the Met is just so amazing. I mean, I went to the back row and I could hear her words perfectly. It's just such an amazing acoustical triumph. And to see what one person looked like up there, it was like, oh, and see all that other space, and just, I think that started to make it a little more concrete and started us imagining how that might be filled, who's going to fill it, what can fill it. I know at one point I just typed in, a drone appears. And that was exciting to do in 5 seconds, and know that someone is going to have to build some monstrosity.
So the
yes.
scale is different, obviously, from a black box theater, which is where I first experienced the play.
Yes.
But so when the physical space is bigger, the ideas become, gives a space for the big ideas, right?
For sure, yeah. Yeah, and I think as you said, with this chorus of 50 men up there, and she's the only woman as part of the flight squadron, it just makes instantly visually clear some of the themes and struggles that she's up against. You just see them, and then you don't have to spend time talking about them. They're just there, and you immediately grasp them, and then you move on, and you have time for other things.
And then things that were discussed by the character in the play, the monologue version, the one-woman show, had to be fleshed out. And things had to be, characters really invented from whole cloth or embodied in a new way. Can you talk about that process?
Sure. I guess I'm just talking. Am I just talking? I don't know.
You're the playwright.
Yeah. So in the story, she references several other characters: her husband, her child, her commander, her censor, her partner up there. So we knew they would be involved in the story, and I think once Jeanine mentioned the squadron up there, that kind of cemented that idea that those would be characters as well. But because it's a one-person play and because she's a bit of an unreliable narrator as it goes along, you're not entirely sure. You're only getting her husband through her filter. And this was different because, there is, I mean, you, the audience member, are watching her husband. You don't have to go through her. So that was a challenge to develop him and make him his own person and find out what is he like when she's not looking at him and what life does he lead, which actually led us to kind of try to find almost a similar American myth for him as she has, if she's the warrior, then what is he? And we went down the road with a few things and ended up with making him a rancher out in Wyoming, and that feel of that kind of very American feel of that rancher. I guess both kind of solitary, but part of a group. Both of them, both working toward their own purpose with a group, but they're both kind of lone wolves as well. And then I will say, just seeing little Lucy up there be the daughter. I mean, again, that's something you just instantly, you're like, oh my God, Lucy is so cute that I can't stand it. It's like looking at the sun. So, and then we've had some characters that ended up on the editing room floor, unfortunately, but as they had to do over time. You gesture to Paul.
It's a process of making it more efficient as a dramatic machine.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. And in your research, when you were writing the play and as it continued, as you expanded the play into the opera, you had to learn about the process of how this this chain of command works in the operation of the drone and the decisions that are made that form the spine of the drama. What did you discover there?
Yeah, I think something I think I read recently was talking about how that chain of command and how all the ritual that you have to go through on a mission, that kind of is a comfort psychologically to be surrounded by, okay, this is what I do when this happens. This is what I say. I say missile spun up. Okay, and then I watch a little longer, and then so there are strict rules, and there's it's acronyms for everything because it's the military, and you have to memorize all of those, and so it's every step of the way, as you were saying, you are not making decisions so much as following what you were told to do, particularly in this situation, I would say, because there's only the two people in this dark trailer, and these trailers are really small. It's a little hard to get your mind around. They're basically like a tractor trailer, and they're in one corner of it. And I've seen some where they've actually put two teams in the same trailer, so you only have half of it. They're very cold. They're very air conditioned. They're very smelly because these guys and gals are sitting in there for 12 hours a day, and the drone really never lands. It does, but it has potentially 40 hours of flight time. So these pilots and sensors tap each other out and then take the controls of the same plane. So it's a very strange thing psychologically, I think, to begin with, but then it's made comfortable by all these rules and all these people you have in the voices in your headset who are kind of approving everything. There's lawyers on your headset. There's sometimes chaplains on your headset. There's a whole world that's in there, even though you're alone in this room with one other person. It's just all so strange. But that's what makes it easier to go through with whatever you're asked to do.
So Jeanine, you have the main character of Jess listening on her headset, and there's multiple people advising her on the life and death decisions that she's making, and sometimes split-second decisions. How did you deal with the challenge of how to depict the voices in her headset musically?
Well, part of it is, the research that George did led me to, because I didn't know anything about this at all. So listening, reading, we read a lot of transcripts, and you could see how unintelligible, there's so much static, and a JAG and a safety observer, they're all in different places. The leveled playing ground is her head. So that we have something called the kill chain that's off stage on mics, and each of them feeds into her, and the audience can hear what she can hear. And so it's a new level of you're alone, but you're never alone, because there are people spitting, literally shouting or saying something often at the same time, or something that the static gets involved and you can't quite say, and you realize, oh my God, there's has to be so much guesswork in this. It's not an exact, it can't be. It's just too, I wouldn't say it's chaotic, but as a layperson, that's what I would call it, to discern who's speaking. They slate themselves and tell you, but 12 hours of that, or then hours of nothing happening, I think it's mentally, I don't know how I would do with 3 days of it.
In this process of this 12-hour shift of monitoring and surveilling targets, you both learned in your research about the moral injury, as you described it, that happens to the pilots witnessing people that they're surveilling, sometimes for weeks on end. They follow their daily lives, their routines, driving, market, meetings, whatever, family. And then when the proper time comes and when that chain of command, all those voices in her head, in her headset, give the order to shoot, what happens to the pilot and how does it affect the pilot becomes the crucial dramatic question of the piece.
Yeah, I think one thing that fascinates both of us is that in in war, generally, the farther away you are from your target, the easy it is to kill someone. But this is this weird world where you're actually the farthest away physically, but as you said, because these cameras can get pretty close to people, and because you're potentially observing somebody for weeks on end, 12 hours a day looking at this person do their laundry and whatever else, it becomes a strangely intimate relationship, which then is psychologically taxing, if you should be called to kill this person. And then you just move on from there. And they are, they're asked to sometimes just to circle around, bodies, or stay with the person that they just killed and, for another 12 hours. So it's a very challenging mental landscape that they're in.
That's a crucial distinction in the show. There's a line, right, about when Jess flew fighter planes and dropped bombs, she'd fly away and wouldn't have to see the results of her handiwork. But in this case, how is it different?
Well, one of the things that we noticed, and I think it's a way that you can also live. So the plot, right? The plot is that she drops something, and then, as the beautiful lyric says, she's long gone by the time the boom happens because she's out of there. And I think you can live that way. I've certainly had times when I lived that way, that we don't stay around to witness or hold how we have behaved. So I think it's also a life philosophy. And then if you do something and you acknowledge what you have done and you stay with what you've done and the harm that you've done or whatever, and you actually bear witness to it, it's something else. And I think that's where, when she's incarcerated at the end of this opera, we changed this ending because I just think the imperative of hope is so important that you can actually get out of it if you decide to no longer be part of, it's that Matthew Broderick, the only way to win is not to play. And that I think that War Games is such a great movie for that, to just say, don't participate in it. How do we not participate in policy that we don't agree with? How do we not become part of the kill chain if we have any agency to say no? So in the time that she's imprisoned, she's morally the freest that she's been.
So the only way to remove yourself from complicity is to step away from it, or to jam the works of the machine of death. As you've both mentioned a bit so far, the pilots who go through this process experience a moral injury. They're traumatized by the experience of watching these bodies, these people that they've been surveying, blown to bits and hovering and lingering over the death site. Jeanine, I know that became a really important focus for you in your research, and how you found yourself connecting with the story. Can you talk about the research you did with Jack Saul and some of what you found there?
I don't know if you know Jack Saul and the Moral Injury Project. His wife is Esther Perel, and Jack he's a trauma specialist, and he travels the country, and we saw it at National Sawdust, these installations of interviews with journalists, with vets, with Air Force pilots, with a lot of people who have, they've tried to make sense of the moral universe. And my question to Jack was, how do people reintegrate? And he said they reintegrate, in his experience, when they come home and they can see, oh, there was a 5-year-old, oh, that's my niece. Oh, that 5-year-old who I saw when I was over there is like that and he's just said there is an equivalence that starts happening, and that's what begins to, in his experience, heal the trauma, because you can incorporate it into memory. And that really stayed with me, because if we think, and I know from raising a child, I relied on so many people. And I thought, oh, we do parent each other's children. We do. We do it through policy. We do it through, observing and through safeguarding. And especially when my family grew up in Italy, I mean, you hung out the window and you were just like, you get off of that thing, and they just parented each other's children all the time. And I think that was a way of seeing that the young in this country belong to all of us. We have a responsibility to them. We can't just say, oh, that's someone else's kid.
The technology, since you started researching this, has probably changed and become increasingly sophisticated. Have you kept track of more recent changes?
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, all my friends send me every article that comes out. So yes, I've tried to keep up. As you probably know, I mean, they've become quite effective as in Ukraine's defense, against Russia. And sometimes, the technology has both gotten more complicated and less complicated because oftentimes they're using, in the Ukraine conflict I can speak to, they're using drones that are just off the shelf, $150, and they figure out a way to put something on them, and then it's a one-way trip for that drone. And then on the up to, they are trying to, I say with trepidation, turn the F-16 into a drone, or UAV is the proper term, I guess, the unarmed aerial vehicle. Or not unarmed. Wait, now I'm blanking on my acronyms.
Unmanned.
Unmanned aerial vehicle. And then it moved to our remotely piloted vehicle, RPV, which it probably still is. So they're working on they've been working on the F-16 model for a while, and now they're working on making it just AI driven, like there's not even a pilot. So those are the exciting things.
Yes,
we have to look forward to.
What moral quandaries arise from an AI-operated drone?
Yes.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong?
Yeah.
What indeed?
Yes, indeed.
I will say too that we've talked to some pilots who are perfectly fine psychologically with it, and Tammy Bartlett was someone we met who was pretty much the character in the play. It was an opera. It was pretty wild.
In terms of her being
in terms of her, just the way she carried herself and kind of her badassery. And she piloted the Warthog plane for a while until she got a spinal injury, which she didn't even go into. It was like the spinal injury, and then ended up. She didn't want to just go home and twiddle her thumbs, so she switched to piloting Reapers, and we talked to her, and she kind of said she had one moment of kind of having a moral question, but then was like, I'm helping my boys, and it was all about the team, and that's how she, I won't.
She could compartmentalize it in a way.
That's what I would say. She didn't seem to open that door, I wouldn't say, anymore.
Yeah. Finally, Jeanine, is there anything else you want to say just about the sound world? I know early on people said, oh, are you going to use electronics because it's a drone? Or, you had to make musical decisions about the sound world you were creating. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I decided to not use any electronics except for the voices off stage and some of the processing, because to me what was really important was just like what we did in the piano, was to discover what instruments themselves can do. You can do so many things with extended technique for wind instruments. If you remove the mouthpieces and breathe into them, that's an extraordinary sound. What they call toneless, which means without sound, strings, where they just take the bow across the frog, and that's a beautiful sound, or the harmonic. There's so many extraordinary things that this orchestra can sound like. I didn't want to open myself up to programming, because I was really more interested in manipulating the acoustic instruments themselves.
And the use of the chorus, obviously in the image we saw in the opening, there's all the fighter pilots singing, very manfully up there. That's one way of using the chorus, but you have other choral techniques that you use throughout the opera, in addition to just the naturalistic, these are the guys singing. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, there's a lot of pitch bending because I thought, you can, a pitch really to me is like a cookie dough ball, and you can flatten it and expand it. It's not just a dot. And so they do a lot of also extended techniques inside manipulating pitch, so you're not quite sure what you're listening to.
And those are kind of expressionistic techniques to express the stress that Jess is under, the moral wavering or blurriness that she's experiencing, right? I mean,
Yeah, and also like a Doppler, if something goes by, vroom, that's a Doppler effect where the pitch changes because the distance changes.
that people falling out the window. Ah. Yes.
Very good.
Yes, exactly. I think, do you have anything else you want to mention before we go to questions?
No, I think we're good.
Questions for anybody? I should come down with a...
So we're going to turn it over to a Q&A. I'm going to circulate with a microphone, so give me 10 seconds and I'll be right down for you.
So I think it's fascinating that the last time I was at Pioneer Works was for scientific controversies with Bessel van der Kolk, whose book, The Body Keeps the Score, has become a classic in explaining and treating PTSD. And as an aside, the FDA just rejected the approval of ecstasy MDMA in a very structured therapeutic program, which I think is still a very promising treatment in an area where there's a lack of effective treatments for PTSD. And I was wondering, George, were you aware of Bessel's work? Did you do more research with his and other people's works as you were doing your libretto?
Yeah, I did read about that a little bit, kind of not so much for this, but just out of interest. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm like, chapter and verse about all the treatments that are used. We don't get into that so much in the story of the opera, and so my time was more spent on, unfortunately, the events that lead one to need those treatments. But I find that all very interesting, and it was kind of surprising that they turned that down as a possible treatment. This was using LSD and other. Yeah.
No, it was just MDMA in a very structured therapeutic program. It wasn't just give people ecstasy.
Right.
And hopefully there'll still be life to this as an effective treatment for PTSD.
Yeah, there's unfortunately a history of that being misused by the military and experimenting on their soldiers. So that's probably hairy territory to then embrace it. But yes.
But we did want to, that in talking about complex PTSD and Judith's book and the way that would be the third act. I mean, I always think of the third act as when an audience leaves and hopefully thinks about a work. Hopefully, that's Act 3, so that you're thinking, how are those people treated? What's the somatic response to trauma? How do we incorporate and reintegrate when we are traumatized on a quotidian level, and it's normalized? And I think, we read about that to just sort of enter into what people are facing, because when you write a story about someone, for me, and George is much more intimate with this, it's not my story. I'm just doing the best I can to try to transpose it literally to sound.
I think this panel is amazing. I have questions for Paul and for George and for Jeanine, but I'll try to stay under 20 seconds. In the museum in Hiroshima, there is a sound recording of a pilot who dropped one of the bombs and who didn't see the result. And the rest of the museum is dedicated to life on the ground, death on the ground. First, I want to shout out for the title, because one meaning of the word grounded that I'm sure you meant but wasn't mentioned is that the audience is grounded in the concerns. The plane is grounded, but the audience becomes grounded. After all that, and it made me think of the movie Zone of Interest, the film where, you kill during the afternoon and you feed your children at night. It's quite remarkable. I have two questions. One is for Paul. If I'm allowed to ask you anything. I think that the Met has been remarkable in the last couple of years in finding topical operas which are also musically wonderful. There's a dozen of them. This is another one. I almost feel like this panel is so remarkable that it belongs at the opera. Everybody should be able to watch this panel after they go to the opera as part of the third act. I wanted to ask I'll pass. I just want to praise the panel and ask a musical question. It has to do with Alan Lerner. He said that the point of a musical is that the song can take you to a place that the play can't. And he used as the example, The Rain in Spain starts very slowly and ends with a wild tango in one song. And I wanted to ask you this question: where does this take you musically? In other words, it's such a remarkable, multi-layered, multi-topic play, and such an amazing topic for the Met to tackle. And I wanted to ask, in the name of music, what you think that where the music can take you in this remarkable thing.
I knew this audience would be extraordinary, and I wasn't wrong. One of the things that music does, the superpower of music, to me, especially musicals and operas, is simultaneity. Comes from it really started with the Greek chorus, and you have a lot of people saying the same thing, or a few people saying different things in counterpoint at the same time. So you get the diamond-like prismatic nature of how, look at this place. There are people in counterpoint up here, right? Hi. They're going ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, and we're still, and there are people going vum, 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 vum. It's counterpoint. It's all counterpoint. And underneath the subway was a cantus firmus. The thing that is really interesting for me about music also is that it compresses time. So in one time where Jess is getting the information about going to Las Vegas, she in turn turns right to her husband. And so that would be a week later or a day later, and it's one measure later. So you can play with lyric time. The other thing that it can do is the theme when the drone arrives. I'll run to the piano. While this monstrous drone is that kind of Dr. Strangelove, this idea of cognitive dissonance. You have this very romantic theme because he's saying the threat of death has been removed. You're going to be safe. You're going to go home to your child every night. You're going to kiss your husband, and you have this massive drone coming up on the screen at the same time. That's the power of the abstract on the concrete, and I think it's just an extraordinary superpower of music.
Hi, thank you so much. My little one here is fascinated. I don't think he can sit through the whole opera, obviously. So I was wondering if you could just play your favorite, or the accompaniment of your favorite song, so he could listen.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. Oh my God, it's such pressure. So this is a very simple, when I was a kid, my lunatic grandmother used to sing a crazy Italian song, but it was a folk song. And Sicilian folk songs always end in tragedy and death and someone being blinded. They just do. But there was one really beautiful one, and the father who is a rancher, who is so grounded, and he meets Icarus, who is Jess, who is up in the sky. It's the crazy way that a woman is not introduced through the male gaze, but a man is introduced through the female gaze, which I was really into. But he sings this song. Can you hold this? Yeah, thanks. It's going to be terrible singing. Will we ride through the valley, my mossy main friend, where the grass grows so green and the plains never end? Where, oh, where will we ride today? My pretty pony and me. So that's one of the. Oh. Anyway, that's dedicated to you. And I have to say, you have done such a great job of sitting through, which I will never forget, how a young person can pay attention. Let us never forget that. That was really cool. Thank you.
I will say also that just hearing that, the variety of musical strategies and themes that you have incorporated in this are quite magnificent. I mean, I don't know.
Thank you, George.
It's really, it just...
We had to come to Pioneer Works to get
Yes,
this compliment,
I need
but I'll
the
take
compliment.
it.
Well, it's just, I don't know. And I've lived with the score for some time, but it's always revealing itself to me, I think because it does keep changing and shifting. Anyway, it's wonderful. I love it.
Thank you.
I'm biased, but, you know.
So a quick question. Oh. Go ahead. Yeah. So the more explicit politicization of opera seems like a relatively new thing. And I know that the Met has clearly embraced it over the past few years, but I'm wondering if you all still get some pushback, either from the Met itself, or maybe you can't speak to that, but from more sort of classic opera people saying that, you know, the marriage of opera and politics really shouldn't exist. Those two should remain separate.
But opera's always been political, right? They stopped writing, I think. Am I wrong? I could be wrong.
Yeah, the marriage of Figaro was revolutionary because it questioned, gave servants power, questioning the elite who were ruling over them. So.
But I do know the spirit in which you're asking something is, I think there's pushback in anything that anybody ever does, in my experience. And theatrically, like, I'm so grateful that I can, like, whatever, if you call it a career, but my work has always been praised or shit on. It's too much for this, it's not enough for this, it's too that and too that. And eventually, I just think, I want to bring, even in Fun Home, you know, when we announced that we were going to do Fun Home, the musical, we got so much flack and not one note had been written. And it just felt like, wow, that's a lot of opinion for something that's not even written. But the attempt to do something to bring people on stage for me who are regularly invisible, and I think the Met is an extraordinary place. 5 operas are in rehearsal right now. Their new works is, you know, embracing. It is an extremely challenging place to run. I now know from the inside out. I think it's extremely easy to criticize institutions, and it's been very interesting to get there in the belly up and see where the effort is being made, because operas are hard to make. So part of it is we need to train musicians like that young person right there so that the art form can change, because that comes with craft. You have to write something engaging, compelling. I don't care if it's atonal, bitonal, tritonal, it has to be compelling for people to sit through so that policies can change. So for me, that's why I teach. To not, I don't think you can teach composition, but it's to say, like, what do you hear? Why do you hear that? What's the ancestral pull? What's the pull, the political pull that you're doing, so that we can, you know, to orchestrate an opera, I'm telling you, is like unbelievably difficult. And Paul is also a teacher. He is a teacher there. Everything to me is you're either teaching or you're listening. So I think that question is really well-founded, and it's going to be one I think about for a while.
Yeah, and I think that hopefully if we succeeded, that this is a human story. I mean, sure, I think anytime you do anything about the military, you know, it can be seen as political, but I do think it's about this woman and what she goes through ultimately, and it's about her struggle to survive in this world. And so, I don't know, and I know in making the transition from the play to the opera, I was always thinking about her, you know, the main character, like, you know, we just have to preserve this and that quality of her. So it's very centered on humanity, you know, a woman who happens to be in the military, who happens to fall in love, who happens to have a child, and then it kind of goes out from there. And people will take what they take from it, and I don't know, there's only so much you can control, you know. And I think there's a certain, and Paul knows better than I, but I'm sure there's a certain percent of the audience who never wants to hear anything new, and there's not much we can do about that. I don't know. But we will do our best to convince them, if they happen to show up, that we've done our best, damn it.
Oh my God, that was so Midwestern, that whole response. I so enjoyed it.
We present 23 operas every season, and they run the gamut from really contemporary, brand new works to maybe contemporary works from 20 years ago to operas that are as old as opera itself. So I think one of the things I always strive to communicate to people is the great diversity of subject matter and approaches and kinds of operas. And if you don't like one, it doesn't mean you won't like others. And if you want to try something new, go to a new opera.
Hi, thank you so much. I want to turn the tables and ask if you could ask us anything about what we just saw or anything that you're interested in getting feedback. How would that go?
Well, I think that's called opening an opera. I mean, I think look, when I put work out there, I feel very vulnerable and very scared, and I get criticism on a daily level. That's just my mom. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's like we have been so hard on this piece, and when we looked at it and thought about things that weren't working, it's like, well, we gathered, we met for 9 hours, and we used language that wasn't mean, but it was direct. What doesn't work? And then it was George and I who had to figure out why it didn't work. So right now, I would say I'm not in a position to receive anything else except to offer, because I feel very, what would I call it? Challenged. And I just sang a new line for the baritone at the Met stage. And he said, but what's the rhythm? And I was like, just sing it on a D. And you know, the head of music gently reminded me that they would love it if I could slow down the new work, because we were constantly looking at every angle. But we have our Sitzprobe tomorrow, so I feel like it's almost cooked. That said, I'm very interested in people coming to see this because it's what we have to offer. We worked really hard on it, and it's going to be flawed because every work is flawed. And accepting our flaws and the flaws of the work that we make is part of the deal. But I'm hoping that people will go on the journey, even if there are parts that they are challenged by or bored by, that they will be moved by it. That's why I write. That's why music, I think, triggers something inside us that comes from a very mysterious place. Science and faith. And so we're hoping that that's where you will travel with her.
We have time for one last question.
Thank you for this. This is incredibly inspiring, and we're talking about how we need to run and watch it. The thing that was striking me about the image on screen is that like seeing the entire choir, is that so much about war is completely reified as a fact of life, and actually even something like healing is seen as positive, when in reality the most positive thing is to actually not fight. So I'm very interested in the characters that are like kind of like beyond the drama, like the people in the positions of power that are kind of like arguably the voices in her headset, but not necessarily, because I feel like there's layers and layers of reification beyond like the drama of war. So I guess both from a libretto perspective, but also from a musical perspective, how did you choose to portray the invisible forces that are actually driving the entire drama, that are things that are like, you know, not in our day-to-day, like it's just like this craving for power and control?
Yeah, I think Jeanine referenced that there's one transcript that the LA Times was able to print of one of these operations that went unfortunately wrong. And that was extremely helpful in finding the language of these voices and what do they speak and how do they sound. So that's one level of authority, and then she has her commander, you know, who's the head of her flight squadron, who's another level of authority. And we wrote, you know, we experimented with backstory with him, and so we know him pretty well, and I think he sees himself somewhat as a mentor to Jess. So yeah, I mean, yeah, so those are basically, but then I think hovering over the whole thing is this sense of something above her, of something's out there that, with this authority, and she's a cog in this machine. But I don't know, can you speak to that anymore? I feel like I'm being vague and I'm not intending to be.
No, it's a really hard question because you can't do everything. And I'm very interested in also what we bring in when we sit in row, for me it's row R, because I don't sit close. And what do you bring? The first thing I do with my composition students is I say, who is in the room with you? Because you're not alone. Your teachers are here. Your ancestors are here. The pull of people. You are not alone. You're a bowling pin, and behind you are hundreds of other pins. So when you sit here, that question is founded from your own history, and that to me is also present in an audience. So there are things that I think we know, and what's really complicated is the idea of the collective versus the individual. This country has always tried to balance so much for, the rugged individual and all that, but we must look at the collective always. And that dance is so hard here with certain amendments that we have. And so I think, you know, we bring that in, and also we have to be protected, which means there has to be agreement. So we decided to follow the journey of this one woman, of what she was doing when she waged war and struck convoys, and then her husband left a message for her to pick up milk when she went home. And the history of war that is always try to make people safe. That's the idea. If you talk to, my family is filled with military men who never discussed with us what they saw, but there was a great pride of a sense of great belonging. Both are true. And how do you present that in a fair way, to not vilify what is protective, but to be curious about the harm that is being done that has not been revealed. I think that's what we are trying to do, and I hope we accomplish it. I don't know.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Paul and George and Jeanine. Thank you for being such an incredibly attentive and intellectual and beautiful audience. And we'll see you all at the Metropolitan Opera this fall. Cheers.